Hey everyone, this is George and I'm back with a new video. When I first saw that the trailer for the next Sony Spider-Man universe film after Venom was Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, I honestly didn't think too much about it, especially because it was an animated feature film rather than live action. Not that there's anything wrong with animated feature films, I love them a lot, but outside of Disney and Pixar animated films, the majority of animated films, they don't have the impact that live action films do, nor do they connect with the already established live action franchises, especially when it comes to superhero films. Then I watched Venom, and if you watch my Venom 2 speculation video, this is a follow-up to that one. So while watching Venom, I realized that the movie doesn't fit in with the Marvel Cinematic Universe. If the executives at Sony tried to roll Tom Holland's Spider-Man into it, I just don't think it would mesh in my opinion. It would be like watching Batman vs Superman and then watching Justice League. So Batman vs Superman is just a completely different film, tonally and story-wise, even though it's a direct sequel and from the same director, mostly without getting into the discussion about Joss Whedon's contributions to the film. In Batman vs Superman's best moments, it was dark and visceral, dramatic, and even violent, while Justice League, on the other hand, was more of just a fun popcorn movie that honestly didn't feel like anything more to me. While MCU Spider-Man is not dark by any stretch of the imagination, it is tonally very different from what we got in Venom. Even Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man universe feels tonally different from the Venom film, but there is another Spider-Man whose film franchise feels like it fits right in with the Venom film, and that's Andrew Garfield's Amazing Spider-Man. Visually and even tonally, Garfield's Amazing Spider-Man movies match the Venom film. While that may be just because they're made by the same studio, I actually feel like there's more to it than that. So back to why I think Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse is so important. The key is in the title, SpiderVerse. In the comics, the SpiderVerse storyline is a massive storyline in which the spider people of different realities must unite in order to stop beings of enormous power. It's a great storyline, so if you haven't read it, you should definitely check it out. So I've watched and I've rewatched the Enter the Spider-Verse trailers, as well as the Venom after credits scene, and while I don't believe the film will use the villains from the Spider-Verse comic storyline, the Inheritors, what it does appear to be focusing on is the spider people of different realities. So you might be thinking, why is this important? Well, I believe this is incredibly important because I think that Sony may be testing the waters and trying to introduce wide film-going audiences to the concept of Spider-Man from alternate universes. The reason I think they're doing this is because they may have plans to bring in another live-action Spider-Man. I think they could be trying to see how wide audiences accept alternate universe versions of Spider-Man by starting with the animated feature film, which could be designed to introduce the concept of the alternate reality spider people. Currently, Marvel Studios and Sony are sharing the Spider-Man character, who is played by actor Tom Holland. While I don't know if it's public knowledge if the contract specifically states there can only be one live-action Spider-Man and the MCU will exert creative control over the character, it makes sense that the MCU would not want another Spidey to possibly confuse audiences. But that contract is expiring soon, and if it's not renewed, or if Marvel doesn't outright buy Spider-Man from Sony, and that's if Sony would even sell Spider-Man back to Marvel, Sony's going to have the opportunity to use Spider-Man again as they see fit. The obvious and most probable outcome is that they choose to roll Tom Holland's Spider-Man into their films. They would essentially be forcing Tom Holland to do a Sony exclusive Spider-Man film sans Marvel Studios. While fans do want Spider-Man and Venom films, if this were to come to pass, I honestly feel like there would be a lot of fan backlash. I think fans would know the film was outside of the MCU and could outright reject it regardless of if it includes Venom or not. Another outcome, and the one I'm honestly most hoping for, is that Andrew Garfield and Sony Studios resolve their differences and he decides to return to the role. Honestly, I believe he'd fit in well with the Venom film as an older and more experienced Spider-Man, and when it comes time for the darker films like the already announced Kraven the Hunter film, which is said to draw elements from the classic yet mature storyline Kraven's Last Hunt, we could see Garfield's more mature Spider-Man go toe-to-toe in an all-out brawl with Kraven. If Sony does it right, it could honestly be a Dark Knight level masterpiece. This could also allow Tom Holland's Spider-Man to stay in the MCU. I think fans could go for this because there are a lot of fans who want Tom Holland to stay in the MCU, but there are a lot of fans who would love to see Andrew Garfield return as the Amazing Spider-Man. It was a pleasant surprise to read the comments in my Venom 2 speculation video, where a lot of viewers commented their support for Andrew Garfield. So if this were to happen, I believe it would be a win-win for every fan. The third possible option is that Sony brings in a completely new Spider-Man. I think this is the outcome that is most difficult to predict when it comes to how fans will take this. While I don't think fans will like this, I'm honestly not sure if they'd hate it as much as if Sony removed Tom Holland from the MCU and forced him into Sony Studios' exclusive Spider-Man films. But this would also bring on the familiar headaches of to do an origin story or not to do an origin story. While I don't mind seeing directors offer their own takes on a hero's origin story, I know that this can and does annoy casual and even longtime fans, as well as use up precious screen time. I believe the most likely outcome is that Tom Holland may have to do a Sony exclusive Spider-Man film after the agreement with Marvel Studios is concluded, if it isn't renewed. Although I have been hearing about possible renewed negotiations between Marvel and Sony, after the success of Venom, I just feel that Sony is just waiting to get their hands back on the character without having to share him or the profits he brings. There's also the fact that Andrew Garfield and Sony Studios didn't end their relationship on the best of terms. And while Garfield has showed tremendous class while discussing his release from the role, you can just tell that it was a painful experience for him, and that may put any hope of him returning to the role out of reach. Whatever happens, I sincerely hope that Sony will consider the fans and try their best to give them what they want, and I honestly believe that bringing Andrew Garfield back is something a lot of fans would be very happy about. So when I go to see the SpiderVerse movie, not only will I be hoping to see a great feature film, but I'll also be keeping an eye out for potential clues about what to expect going forward with the Sony Spider-Man universe. If you made it this far into the video, thank you so much for viewing. If you enjoyed the video and want more, like and subscribe, and go ahead and let me know in the comments section what other content you'd like to see, and take care.
Perfect.